Okay. Let's see. All right, so at this stage, I don't have to continue with the billet. I can use indirect percussion. But I'm going to use the billet a little bit more on here. Just some light strikes, and then switch over to indirect percussion. Okay. So the object was to get it thin around the edges, delay the middle cosmetics. It's kind of rough in the middle. Take the curvature out, pretty much. Now I'm getting into where I'm going to be developing the biface further and thinning the biface, which means running flakes past halfway. Up to now, not all the flakes have to go past halfway. They can go any distance. A lot of them were short flakes. But like the last strikes, they were already starting to go past halfway. That's kind of where you know, or when you know the transition is taking place between the initial reduction stage and the more refined biface reduction stage. Okay. Although in the initial reduction stage, you can shoot long flakes. You can try that, but as you can see, when I did that, it runs a risk of breaking the whole thing in half. Now, if I would have taken short flakes here and there, trying to not produce long flakes that I could use for points later on, would that have been more successful? Yeah, maybe. I think the percentage chance of it being more successful if I wasn't after these kind of flakes, the percentage chance would have been greater. It would have been a strategy that would have been more successful for preserving as much mass as you could for a blade from that particular nodule, right? But since I wanted to use a lot of this for other stuff, I had a slightly different strategy. But now, once I'm here, this is all going to be to preserve this particular biface. Okay. Now, one thing I saw in the other video was just kind of aggressive grinding, but it was rounding off the edge. It was there's different types of abrading and grinding. Okay, there's brushing, right? You brush like this, you're going to have more of an angular surface if you brush, because it just knocks off flakes, especially with a rough abrader. Brushing like this leaves you with an angular or kind of a beveled look to the edge. If you're doing this, it's going to round it off. So if you're a new guy and you're going this way and you wanting to get a bevel, you're not going to get it. You have to brush to get that angular surface. You can go both ways like that, right? There's different ways to abrade. You can combine the two. You can do the brushing, which removes flakes and little bits of shatter. And then to follow up, you can smooth it off to give you a strong area to strike. All right. The platforms, as best I can tell so far, I've been thinking about this a lot. The best I can tell so far is the platforms for billet strikes and for indirect percussion strikes are exactly the same. Exactly. You can hit the platform with either a billet or an indirect percussion tip. Any platform that you see at this stage can be hit with either tool. And if you want to create a platform, it's created in the same exact way, as far as I can tell. After all these years of napping and trying to figure out, and I think I may have said that they're slightly different. But for billets and for indirect percussion work, As far as I can tell, it's exactly the same. Now, it's a little bit different for hammerstone. If it's a hard hammerstone, you do need to abrade a little bit more or hit a flatter surface. Because if it's a sharp surface with a hard hammerstone, it's going to shatter a lot. It doesn't shatter as much with a softer hammerstone or a soft hammer like a antler. Okay, now I use this abrader or commercial grinding wheel abraders to knock off flakes like a hammerstone too, right? This is a medium grit grinding wheel cracked in half and into quarters. What would I judge this to be as far as a hammerstone consistency? This would be like a soft, I was going to say soft hammerstone. It's a little bit harder than a soft hammerstone because it's odd. It's an artificial material. It's between a soft and medium hammerstone. A little bit harder than a soft, a little bit softer than the medium. Okay, so yeah, you can remove flakes with the artificial abrader. All right, so now I'm going to use a indirect percussion flaker. This is going to be wrought iron, but you can use mild steel, like a spike nail. This is a spike nail. Produces the same result. Mild steel and wrought iron basically have the same properties. Okay, so you don't have to go out and get an expensive piece of wrought iron. You can get a piece of mild steel. Rods of mild steel are available at the hardware store. You can get different diameters. Or you can just buy nails. Nails are a little bit different properties than the rods. I think nails are better. Okay. For flint knapping. The rod is a little bit harsh. Okay. And then the ultra high molecular weight plastic for the mallet. Okay. So the technique is when you get this to this stage, so you want to make sure the ends are thin before you attack the middle. And you attack the thick spots first. And if you have to zigzag anywhere, use a zigzag technique instead of a trimming technique. I saw a lot of trimming going on where, you hit the edge. If it's thick or something is going on where it needs to be reduced, I saw a lot of trimming with the billet instead of chip, flip, chip, flip, chip, flip. It should have been chip, flip, chip, flip, chip, flip. It should be a zigzag. So you're not trimming a bunch of material off of your biface. Okay, if you want to get rid of thick areas, if it's really thick, like a square edge or, very bulgy, you do the chip, flip, chip, flip. And in this case, I can take some of this bulge off with the indirect percussion flaker. So I'm going to target certain areas with the indirect percussion flaker instead of going through here and on my leg and trimming like this. I don't want to do that. I want to make sure that I use the most efficient technique to remove not only material from the lump, but maybe send something a little bit deeper to make it more smooth and evenly convex. That's another thing I saw was not much attention being paid to maintaining the convexity. Long flakes love convexity through the whole pathway, right? You don't want to hit into a flat area. You don't want to hit into a scooped out area. Even though it looks like you need to remove something cosmetically and it looks like it might travel into that area as far as the flake goes, don't hit into a scooped out area and don't hit into a flat area. Hit into a convex area. And if it's not convex, you're going to have to lose some of the edge to make it convex. Okay, all of this is convex in here. So I'll be striking in those areas. Now I'm catching these flakes, right? I got my finger. I don't know how this went. I got my fingers on the flake to catch the flakes. Do I have to support these flakes when I'm striking? No, it's just incidental. A lot of times it doesn't matter if you support or not. I could have spread my fingers apart and hit that and let that flake go free. But I wanted to catch that flake to show you what the flake looked like. Okay? Very little material removed from the edge. Much more than if you were to trim this down. See how very little was lost? And yet it carved a nice path through that lump. All right, that's part of the efficiency of using indirect percussion instead of trimming strikes to get rid of the mass. Okay. Now this angle here, I noticed in the video that he had the angle down very well. He knew the angle, right? There's not much leeway here as far as driving into the stone. You can turn it this way and then drive out. Like if I were to show you from this direction, you can drive flakes outward this way, but if you're starting to drive flakes inward, you don't have much leeway here. You have very little leeway in this angle when driving in flakes, because if it's too down like this and you hit inward, it's going to create too much of an inward force, and that's going to either want to go that way or create a big bulb. It's going to want to reverse hinge or create a big fat bulb. So you have a lot of leeway up here in this direction above the zero, but you don't have much leeway below zero. Like zero is in line with the center line. This is zero right here. You have a lot of leeway here above zero, striking downward. But as you approach zero, your options get very limited. This angle here is very subtle. Okay, you don't have much leeway at all in this angle here. Okay, I hope that's clear. So it looked like he had the angle here down perfect. It's always going to be the same, basically the same, because it's just very little difference in here, because I don't know how to explain this easily, but this is not very thick, right? So that flake is going to go into the stone, right? You don't have much leeway in here for that flake to travel. In fact, you got a very, very small leeway, because you only want to capture the top 1/16 of an inch. That leeway in there is very, very small. If you only want to capture a little bit of it, like 1/8 of an inch or 1/16 of an inch, there's not much leeway at all here. Because, the forces, once you start messing with this angle, the forces are going to go this way or that way, right? So this angle is pretty much not going to vary at all when you're trying to thin. So I could try to show you every time I strike. I will say, well, I think I struck at this angle, and then I strike again. I think I struck at that angle. I struck again. I think I struck at that angle. You're going to notice that angle is the same every time, basically. And if it's not, there's only going to be very subtle differences. Okay? The only major difference in the angle is up here, above zero. Sometimes I'll hit down like this. Sometimes I'll change this around and hit across like that. Anything above zero is fair game. It's just short flakes, trimming, whatever. But once you get down below the zero, very limited, very limited. And it's going to look like the same angle every time I'm describing it, especially as it gets thinner and thinner and thinner. This angle gets more and more confined. So it's always going to be the same angle. The thinner it gets, the less leeway you have. The less leeway you have. Okay? All right. Here we go. Now I'm gouging this out. Each one of these flakes is being gouged out. the way that I'm putting the flaker on the edge is like a pressure flaker. There has to be some edge available to set your flaker on. It can't be on a very sharp edge. It has to be on a flat part, or at least a strong part. It can be slightly rounded, but you want to be able to set it on something that, it doesn't move. It's not going to move around. You can load up with pressure if you want, but that angle in here, especially when it's thin, is always going to be basically the same angle. So I can show you every time, but it's going to be the same. Okay. It's going to look the same. It's not going to be exactly the same, but it's going to look the same. So I'm trimming, but I'm losing very little off of the edge each time. I don't know if you can see. I lost that much off of the edge, that much here, that much there, this much here. See those little dimples? That's how much I'm losing on each strike, but I'm thinning it down quite a bit. That's the efficiency. Don't be trimming a lot on your biface if you don't have to. Use the abrader to brush, to create an angular, to create an angular edge, okay? And then you can go across this way to round it off to make it stronger, but not too much, okay? Unless you're using a hammerstone, which a lot of times requires a very strong platform. But otherwise, brush. I wasn't seeing much brushing. I was seeing some aggressive brushing, but not intentional focused brushing. And then you go across this way to round it off, but you don't need all that much. And experiment with it. Sometimes some materials need a lot, some don't. Okay, and I'm tacking the thick areas first. Tack the thick areas first, and mainly toward the ends. I still have not attacked this mess in the middle. I don't want to attack this yet. I want to get the ends cleared up. And for some reason, I'm not getting a focus. Let's see. I'm going to clean the lens here. Hold on. Okay. So yeah, I'm just attacking the ends and the edges before I attack the middle. See, you can have your fingers on it if you want, but these flakes will travel freely also. You don't need a support like this, although you can have it. If I do support it on purpose, it's very minimal. I don't pull, I don't press. The only firmness is right here. This kind of firmness where this is not bending back at all. So when I strike, I'm striking against a rigid hand. I'm not pushing on it. It's just a rigid backing. The hand is rigid but not compressing. I think I discussed this in some other videos, but it's probably time I did that again. I don't compress. I just hold. I make my hand rigid. Okay. And if I am touching the stone, it's touching lightly. Yeah. When it does that, that means the platform's not strong enough. So I move over a little bit. I didn't lose much of the edge on that. See that? Move over a little bit. Hit a little bit harder. Try to send that flake across because there was something there that was kind of bulgy. Flakes are always going to be slightly curved, so it's best to have a slightly curved surface. Don't strike into a flat area or an area that's got a scoop out. All right. So I started to clear out the middle because the ends were looking pretty good. I lost a little bit of width there, but that's all right. I got some kind of overshot here. I don't know when that occurred. I wasn't paying attention. But as you know, if you've been watching the channel, to me, overshots are not good at all. Okay. Now I trimmed that off. See, I lost width on that dig, but I'm trimming it off so I can move the edge this way, so now I can attack that middle part with a better platform situation. So I use this edge, I use the width here to strike into this side. Okay, it was still wide, fairly wide. It was like 1/8 of an inch wider. I used that width to accommodate a platform that I used to strike in this way. Now with that strike, I don't see anything else very useful, so I don't need that width anymore. I'm going to trim it back so I can use a stronger and lower edge to attack this area. So I wasn't seeing too much strategic planning in that way in the video that I was watching, number 174, where you would strategically use width to strike in one direction, trim, and then strike in the other direction. And I think there was some of that, but a lot of it was just strike and then look, strike, opportunistic, which is fine. But then when it looked like there wasn't very many opportunities, it was a lot of trimming. Trim. I don't recommend trimming all that much, except when you are specifically trying to get to an area that requires trimming. Okay. And you can trim with the abrader. It removes less material than with a billet or a bopper. That's one reason why I don't use boppers. They just eat through material quickly. I can trim sufficiently with the abrader, and you lose a lot less width. Remember, you need a little bit of width. You lose about 1/8 to 1/16 of an inch off of the width for every platform that you gouge out. So you need that width. Okay, now this is going to be tricky because I don't know how deep that crack goes in there. But it's good to have thin ends, right? Thin ends, so that when I do strike in the middle here, I'm not going to have excess weight on the ends hanging out there that may put undue stress on this crack to snap the whole thing. But we'll see what happens. I'm going to do some risky strikes into the center to see if I can clear that out. I'm going to take a strike off to the side first before I hit the middle. Why? I just want to see, I want to gauge the material. Sometimes it's inconsistent. It's also kind of chunky. I like to have the ends a little bit thinner. But sometimes it's inconsistent, and if you take a flake near the area where it's critical, you can get a feel for the material in that area. And if it's going to be steppy, you'll know right away. If it's going to be inconsistent and it doesn't travel, you'll know. So take a flake close to where the critical area is first, or take some series of flakes like I'm going to do here, just to get the feel for it. It seems pretty consistent without other cracks involved. I took a flake right there it does seem like the crack goes in further into the material than I thought it would. This is the last flake here, right along the crack, and it looks like the crack goes down further. My next strike is going to be here somewhere into this, across that ridge there. But I need to fix this platform. I'll show you what it looks like in a minute. Right now it's too jagged. So let's see if I can pressure flake this into a better position, or a better contour. So that seems to be much better. Let's see. The lighting isn't so great. You can see the difference now. It doesn't matter if the platform is isolated or sticking out. With an indirect percussion tool, you can strike platforms that are recessed. You can strike platforms that are protruding. You can strike platforms that are level. There's 3 different types of platforms. There's recessed, protruding, and level. I don't think those are used in the literature, but that's what I call them. Now, I'm going to hit right here. Let's see. You can kind of guess where I'm going to hit. I hit right there. I'm trying to use the viewfinder when I'm doing this. That's why it's all like whoa, whoa. I'm gonna hit right there. There's a little bit of a bugaboo right there. It would be best if it was completely convex, which means, yes, if I were to grind the surface, some guys utilize this technique where you grind the surface to make it more level or more smooth along the line of your flake removal. I don't use it very much because it's time consuming, but you guys who have plenty of time, it is something to consider. You can do that, and it does strengthen the flake. It does do a good job sometimes. All right, so here we go. If I think about it too much, it won't work. Okay. So perfect platform. Something was weak and it didn't go. It should have shot a flake across there, but it just crushed the platform. So I'll try again. This time instead of using the pressure flaker, I'm just going to brush it. Okay. And right on that crack, I'm going to move over a little bit to the side here. So obviously that hitting right on the crack is not going to do it. Now why am I hitting right on the crack? Just to see what happened. Just to see. Okay, so I moved over to the side. I hit a flake across there. It worked all right. There's some weird stuff going on there. I hit right on the crack so I can see. Sometimes you can see how deep it goes from looking at the platform. Let's see if I clean off that surface. I'm taking some extra time on here because this is a critical area that can ruin the whole piece if you're not careful. If I clean that off, sometimes you can see how deep the crack goes, but I don't know if I'll be able to. don't know if I'll be able to see how deep that crack goes. No, I can't really tell. Although it looks, let's see if I can zoom in just a little bit more. It doesn't want to stay focused, but I think I can see it. Here's the crack. It's very risky for this piece. Until I get rid of this, I'm not home free. You can see it does travel partially into that platform. So I want to hit to this side, so when I scoop out, it'll scoop out a semicircle like this next to that crack. So I'm going to hit on this side and try to shoot a flake through there. Okay. But it'll be on the next segment.